Hello there, this is Chris Phelps. This here is my muzzleloader project for Sonoran Desert Institute. I received this in the mail a little while ago. I didn't really look at my dashboard to see what courses were coming. So I just knew we were doing customizing and woodworking. I thought this was just stock until I opened it and was quite happily surprised. I've always wanted to build a rifle from the ground up, so this was quite the experience for me. What's also nice is, unfortunately, I live in the state of Illinois, where I can only hunt with a shotgun, at least for deer, with a shotgun with slugs, or a muzzleloader when it comes to firearms. Unfortunately, in the state of Illinois, these guys are considered firearms and they can't be bought off the shelf, even though ATF doesn't want them to. Illinois still decides that they want to do the paperwork, at least for a background check for one of these guys, which is wonderful. But I digress. I can talk about that for a very long time. Here, I started, per the material, I started by inletting the lock here. Front of the lock fits pretty decent, not the greatest. The rear, on the other hand, it's a little choppy down here. Used the chisels, sandpaper, but right here it was really hard, so I took the sanding bit on my Dremel to try and loosen it up a little bit. Well, as you can see, I took a little bit too much away right here. Doesn't look too bad, but I'm still not a fan. And of course, functions check. This rear trigger is a little heavy. This front trigger, on the other hand, is only about 1.5 pounds. And all I did was just kind of polished these a little bit. I didn't really do, I would say, a trigger job, just cleaned up a couple of burrs. Then I moved on to the trigger itself, or the trigger mechanism. Got that inletted using the chisels provided, mainly the scraper. Used the vaner just a little bit. A little bit of sandpaper. Then, once the trigger was in place, and then inletted the trigger guard. I see it's a little too wide over there, but other than that, it's not too bad. There's a few places where I took a little bit too much. But after that was inletted, then I went on to polish all of the brass pieces. So you can see, we'll get to that in a second. That's a little, doesn't meet quite right. But all in all, the brass doesn't look too bad. I started off using 120 grit paper. Then I moved on to 150. No, I take that back. 100, 120, 150. Then 220. Then I took a brass wheel to them off of my Dremel at a high speed, and that kind of polished away all the scratching that might have been on there from any of the sanding that I did. After that, I took 2000 grit sandpaper, automotive sandpaper, took a little bit of CLP actually to get the paper wet, and then just kind of polished it. Then I went back over it with the polishing brass wheel on my Dremel at a high speed. So after that, I moved back here to the buttstock and this little guy right here. So you can see this side of the buttstock's not too bad. It fits pretty good. This, unfortunately, I moved a little too far forward and wasn't able to get the best connection right there. But, well, my screw points were too close together to actually repair and just scoot this a little bit farther forward. If I would have done that, I would have had to insert dowels, and as you can see at the moment, it's kind of hard for me to go to the store and buy things. I just had complete ankle reconstruction. On the other side, however, I don't have the greatest fit. There's a little bit of a gap right there. I took a little bit too much. There's kind of a lip, I guess you could say, right here. But, oh well. It doesn't look too bad. There's a couple of scratches here from where I got a little happy with the file. I left those there mainly because I like the way they look with the stain. I thought about raising them, but I just kind of prefer them there. Other than that, back here, didn't really do a whole lot until it came to finishing. My next step was down here, then inserted this thimble. Of course, I had to drill through the other side and inserted a screw. That was done just by hand drill and putting the stock in my little vise. I didn't really get a good bite with that screw, so I decided to put a little bit of epoxy underneath there too. That sucker's not going anywhere now. I did the same thing over here. I got a little better bite with the screw with this thimble, but I still used epoxy just to be on the safe side. Let me come here with this cap. You can see, kind of, those aren't the original screws. I lost one of the screws, so I went to Lowe's. Well, had someone go to Lowe's for me, pick up a set of screws that were close, that matched the one I still had. So then I went out in the garage, got a little bench that I can sit on. It's just tall enough to where I can work on this with. Prop my casted foot up. These were a little bit long, so I had to file them back down, and then I had to, of course, tap or use a bigger drill bit, and there was a little bit more room so they'd sink down in there and not stick out as bad. And I guess we'll just move on to the sights here. The sights weren't too bad, actually. I got them into place without a whole lot of issue. This front one went in a lot easier than the rear one. All I really had to do was file the bottom until the little black coating here was gone. As soon as it was shiny down there, they fit in pretty good. Now with the rear sight, though, I did have to take a little bit off of this front part of the dovetail here. I had to file that just a little. I believe there was kind of maybe a little burr or something there, and it didn't want to fit in just right. So that took a little bit longer, but I digress. Back to the sanding and stuff. Next, I of course put the trunnions on the barrel, and then took my drill press and had someone hold the other end of this guy and put the drilled the holes for the trunnions. This side is a little bit bigger than the other. I kind of did that on purpose. You can see how tiny the holes on this side are, and you can see the pin there. That's, to me, I did that mainly as a way to make it easier to get the pins out. They're pretty good. I have to take a much smaller punch and tap them out, but they come out pretty easy. That way I can take this thing apart if I ever need to do anything with it. Then, of course, all the fitting was done. Of course, I had to sand this guy down too. But then all our fitting was done, so then I came back here and started shaping. I did use a file back here a little bit, just to kind of get it smooth. But I mainly used a 60 grain, 60 grit abrasive paper, abrasive sponge to sand this first, kind of give it a little bit more definition right here and around these corners. Then I took 80 all the way up to 220 grit paper, sanded them down, got it looking all nice. Then, I'll try not to drop this guy. Then I moved on to the front here, used the same 60 all the way up to 220 grit abrasive paper and the abrasive sponge, which those are pretty handy for up here, so you can just grab them and squeeze them and sand this way. Of course, after that was done, cleaned her all off, and I stained her using black cherry. I had that on hand from an AK stock I did. Quite the fan of that. I really like the way that this stain looks. Then I also had a dark gray from another AK I did. So that was a darker color, so I figured I'd offset it with that. I like the way that looks. Then, of course, I had removed the sights and finished the barrel. Instead of using Express Brown, I used a Dura Brown in an aerosol can, mainly because that was a lot easier for me with a cast. I do plan, however, to get my Class 7 FFL, or Type 7, and actually produce some firearms, so I wanted to give that aerosol Duracoat a chance, and I'm really impressed with it. I plan to use that on any firearm that I produce after I get my FFL, that is. You can kind of see there's a few spots, like right there, where I had a little bit of running. It's mainly due to the fact that it's my first time using it. There's another one right there. But I also couldn't really stand, so I had to sit at a chair and reach up, and I didn't have the greatest light. So I wasn't able to see that I put too much on, unfortunately. But all in all, it doesn't look too bad, so I'm pretty happy with it. I did fire this weapon. Gave me about an inch and a half group at about 50 yards. Which, I mean, with these iron sights, honestly, I don't find that too bad. They hit straight on, hit the bullseye of the target, just inch and a half group at 50 yards, to me, at least, is impressive. But, thank you, and here's my project.